Juror 55, I believe. Is that come on up. Morning.
Good morning.
And you are Juror 55, correct?
Correct.
All right. A couple things before I turn it over to the attorneys for questioning. First thing is to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Now, I'm wearing a mask. I'll continue to do so. You have plexiglass between us and in front of you. The attorneys have plexiglass in front of them. My point here is, if you would like to remove your mask to be heard more clearly, or because it would be more comfortable for you, feel free to do so. And I'm kind of leaving it to you on how you want to proceed. In any case, if you could speak near the microphone, I think actually you're about right.
Okay.
I think that generally will pick you up, and I'll adjust as much as I can to make sure that you are heard. First of all, you filled out the questionnaire. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that and to submit it to us. There's a lot of good information there for the lawyers to ask you about. First of all, is everything true on the questionnaire?
Yes.
And any changes or additions to the questionnaire that you can think of right now?
No.
All right. The questionnaire did advise you not to read any articles, avoid any media about this, but we recognized back in December when you filled this out, or January, that time has passed. You inadvertently may have been exposed to some information about this case. For example, maybe seen a headline in passing, or a friend or relatives talks to you about the case, and we told you don't tell anybody you're a juror, so you couldn't exactly stop people from doing that. Have you learned anything about this case since December and as you sit here today?
No. I've chosen to avoid it as much as possible.
Okay, great. So nothing about not only the facts of the case, but about maybe the parties, any related litigation, anything like that?
No.
Okay. Any pretrial matters, anything about the case or the procedures that have been around the case?
No.
Okay. Excellent. The whole point is, as a juror, you have to decide this case only on the evidence that you hear in the courtroom, apply the law as I give it to you. And so while everybody has heard something about the case, to varying degrees, do you think you could do that, is put aside anything you may have heard or seen about this case and decide the case just on what you hear in the courtroom and apply the law just that I give to you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. You were given a list of witnesses. Anybody look familiar on that list?
No.
All right. All right. We had an estimate of trial of 4 weeks, basically. And I think you had some concerns about the length of the trial. Can you tell me about those?
Just for my work purposes, just to let my employers know how long I'm be done, and because I am working on some projects right now, just how to deal with those without causing questions upon my colleagues is where I'm at.
Okay. And you mentioned financial, it might be hard for you. Have you found out, does your employer pay you for jury duty?
Yeah, that's all taken care of and
Okay.
addressed, so I don't have to worry about that anymore.
All right, so that's not a concern. It's more the substance of your work. And
Correct.
do you think you might be trying to do some work after hours to?
Yes, I've had long discussions with my employer just to be prepared, and we've already worked out the working agreement, so I'm good.
Okay. All right. And when asked whether you weren't sure you wanted to be on the jury, and you noted some, do you have concerns for your personal safety?
I do for afterwards, because I know
Okay.
then it will be a public information, and it really depends on how the trial, the end result is. And being as this is new to me, I just don't know what I'm to be facing.
Right.
And just want to be prepared.
Okay, and you understand that you are anonymous at this point.
Correct.
Will remain so through the trial. At some point in the future, and not even immediately after the verdict, that's up to me to determine on when it's appropriate to do so. I would, your name would become public, a part of the public record. That doesn't mean you have to talk to anybody, but it could become part of the public record.
Correct.
Knowing all that, do you think you could decide this case and not, without worrying, well, I better come to this verdict or this verdict, because otherwise I might be in trouble?
The verdict isn't the real answer. It's the fact of how people perceive it, because everybody's going to perceive it differently based on the outcome. It helps me to know that it's not going to be public right away, because hopefully some time will have passed before it's public and everybody will move on.
Right. Okay, great. I'm sure the lawyers will probably follow up on that as well.
Correct.
Do you have any questions before I turn you over to the attorneys?
No.
All right. Mr. Nelson, as to juror number 55, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
What I'd like to do here this morning is ask you some kind of general, broader questions about yourself, about your experiences, and then focus into some of the questions that you answered on the questionnaire.
Okay.
All right? So, assume you and I met under a different circumstance at a social event or a party, and we're engaged in a conversation. What are a couple of things I'm going to walk away knowing about you after that conversation?
Depends on the topic of conversation, of course. I'm a single parent. I work in the healthcare field. I sell Pampered Chef as a side hobby. Those are the main things I talk about with people.
Okay. And you have 2 children, right?
Correct.
And one's older and one's in her teens or his teens?
Correct.
Okay. When you, at some point, you learned that you were a prospective juror in this particular case, right? What was your initial reaction to learning that you were being called in this particular case?
Being as it's my first time, I thought, wow, first time on such a big case, kind of a thrill and caution at the same time, because I don't, with everything going on in the world now, you just never know how things are perceived. And my first reaction is I'm going to do the best I can if chosen, because that would be how things work out. I'm going to give my best opinion and make the case very fair.
Okay, great. Can you think of a situation in your personal or professional life where you've been required to sort of step in and resolve a conflict between 2 people?
In my current role, I do that quite often.
Okay.
I work a lot with the patients. If there's patient issues, I'm usually one of the first people out there to deal with the patient and help resolve the issues that they are dealing with our particular clinic.
Okay. And so when you're involved in that kind of a process, how do you approach the resolution of conflict? What are some tools you bring to that?
Well, first is listening. You have to listen to everything. Sometimes they just need to vent, and then you pretty much have to figure out what is their main issue and try to resolve it and see if I can resolve it within my means. If not, I'll do my best to come up with a win-win for both of us.
Okay. Now you understand that, I guess in the context of being a juror, that's ultimately what part of what your role is conflict resolution, right?
Correct.
There's obviously a conflict between the parties in this case, as well as there may be conflict that arises in the jury room.
Correct.
Okay. So if you were, let me ask you this, if you were in the jury room and a particular piece of information comes out in trial, right? And one group of people is really, they think they're adamant that this is the most important piece of evidence. Another group of people is saying, well, that may not be as relevant. How do you approach that situation?
I would have to be neutral, and I have to give each group the opportunity to show why they feel that way, and yet, after hearing both parties, come up with my own resolution and say, well, what about this? Because I'm going to have to share my opinion at some point in time, but being able to hear both parties, a lot of times that's all they want to know, and then it's a matter of you trying to bring out things that, well, I'm questioning this. Why are you saying this? And why are you saying this? And maybe even possibly have some insight from both parties on different ways of looking at things.
So listening to both sides of the story is an important factor, and looking at what other information may support one side or the other is an important
Correct.
factor. Okay. How about in your personal or professional life, a situation where you have been called upon to determine who's telling the truth about a certain circumstance?
I would say more in my professional, I deal with this more, but it's a matter of gathering the facts. And I'm hoping I will be presented the facts to know how to make that decision.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain of something, you'd formed an opinion, only to later learn that you were wrong?
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay.
Sorry.
Recognize it's a possibility.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Always.
Would you be the type of person who learns from and tries to apply that to similar situations in the future, or would you be the person kind of brushes it off and says, mistakes happen?
I'd use it as a learning opportunity for sure.
Going back to the the situation, let's put yourself back in that jury deliberation room, and rather than being two sort of competing factions over a piece of evidence, you're now the person who's adamant about this information is incredibly important, right? But a contingency of the other jurors are saying it's not that important. Are you the type of person who can, kind of stand by her principles if you form that opinion, or are you going to just agree with the others simply to build consensus?
I'm the type of person that is going to expect or want them to hear my side of the opinion and have them try to prove me wrong so that I can show them maybe a different side of something. Okay. I'm not going to just go with the flow type of thing, especially if I feel really strong about something. I'm definitely going to want to be heard.
Okay. But you'd still be willing to re-examine your views on this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. And the last kind of general question is your job as a juror is to hear all of the evidence in court, right? Set aside anything you may have learned before that's not presented in court. And at the conclusion of the case, the judge will present you with the law, right? Are you able to read the law and apply it as the judge gives it to you, even if you think the law is wrong or should be changed?
I'm not in a position to change the law. I'm in the position to uphold the law and bring it forward to whatever the case is.
Okay. So I am going to focus your attention on a couple of your questions, and again, no one's trying to trick you or anything of that nature. If you want, I will in all likelihood just simply read you your responses.
Okay.
And we will then explore it a little further. Okay? So the first question kind of asks you to write down what you remember seeing or hearing about this case in the news or the media. And in your answer to that, you wrote, I heard about this on the news, but could never fully watch the whole thing, as this disturbed me that the officer didn't change or remove his knee placement. Do you remember? I mean,
Yep.
okay. Now, I want to, by the thing, we're talking about a video. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I want to make sure we're kind of on the same page. There was a video that was taken by a bystander. That video got uploaded to Facebook. It went viral, and it became a news story.
Correct.
Is that the video that you're referencing?
Yes.
And there's a question later in the questionnaire that asks you how many times you've watched that video, and you wrote, I believe, once, but I didn't even finish the whole thing.
Correct.
So, in terms of that video, how did you come to be familiar with that video? Was it through social media? Was it through the news media? How did you learn about that video?
The news media.
Okay. And so the videos that were shown on news stories, were they more smaller clips or as a part of a larger story, or were you watching some news media and there was a link to watch the entire video?
It was a short clip.
Okay. Did you ever go and like, I want to see what's more about this, and look up the actual full video to watch that?
No, I have not.
Okay. When you were asked about that video, you said that you couldn't watch it in full because it was too disturbing for me. Do you remember that?
Correct.
Is it fair to say that you formed an opinion about what was happening in that video simply based on watching that video, or what parts of it you watched?
I would say it's the fact that someone was harming someone else from what I'm seeing, and I just couldn't watch that, whether just based on the human-to-human information that was being presented during that video, I just couldn't watch it anymore.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, there was a question later in the questionnaire about being able to see graphic images, graphic types of, whether it be video or photographs, and you had some trepidation about that. Would you agree with that?
You said trepidation?
Yeah, like just nervous, like you were concerned about that.
Yes, I was concerned about it.
Okay. So it's entirely possible that the entirety of that video could be admitted as evidence in this case. Would you be able to watch the entire video?
I would, based on my role in this, I would have to, because that's part of the whole evidence.
Now, also, would you agree that that video is really only a part of the story?
Correct. I definitely agree with that.
Okay. And you have never gone and have you ever seen any other videos of this incident, whether they be the police officers' body-worn cameras or any of the like surveillance videos that were released?
No, I have not.
Okay. Would you be able to, again, wait until all of the evidence is presented and decide this case based on the entire story and both sides of that story fairly and impartially?
That is my role here.
Now, you were asked a couple of questions about your general impression of both Mr. Chauvin and Mr. Floyd. And with respect to Mr. Chauvin, you checked somewhat negative, that you had formed a somewhat negative impression of Mr. Chauvin. And you wrote, I think they could have handled it differently. I got the impression he didn't care about George Floyd, or GF is what you technically wrote. It's okay to have an opinion, all right? We all have our own opinions about virtually everything. Can you set that opinion aside? And you formed a somewhat unfavorable opinion of my client, agreed?
Correct.
Can you set your opinion aside and judge this case based on the facts?
I believe I stated in my questionnaire that I don't know that based on the little clip that I've seen, that I've even gotten all the facts to form an opinion.
Okay.
And I won't be able to form an opinion on him until I have all the facts. And that's what someone should do.
Okay. And feeling the same way about Mr. Floyd as well?
Yes. I think he has more to bring to the table, as Chauvin does.
Okay. Now, in terms of some of the general rules of law, you were asked some questions. You're able to apply the presumption of innocence to Mr. Chauvin at this point?
Yes.
You understand that under our system of law, under our Constitution, Mr. Chauvin has nothing to prove here.
No.
He doesn't have to ask, we don't have to ask a single question, we don't have to introduce a single piece of evidence, we don't have to participate in this process. Do you have any problem with that?
No, because I feel right now he's innocent until we can prove otherwise.
Okay, fair enough. And I think you've made that quite clear in the course of your questionnaire, so I appreciate that. You were asked a question about your impression of whether the community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the events that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since Mr. Floyd's death. And you wrote, I think all our communities took a beating from these. Unfortunately, a negative one. Everyone was scared it was going to come to their neighborhood. So, I mean, can you explain what you kind of mean by that?
There's just a lot of riots that were being taken place around the Twin Cities area, and I know in other communities as well. And based on where I lived, there was one taking place not too far from where I live, and that's pretty far from Minneapolis, and so it kind of spread to other areas outside of where the incident happened.
Okay. Do you think there's a difference between a riot and a protest?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Can you see the difference between the protests that occurred after Mr. Floyd's death and the riots that took place?
Yes.
Do you think that they're one and the same?
No.
You were asked about past your observations or your own personal past police contacts, and you were asked the question, have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed? You wrote yes, and you wrote, I wouldn't say more force, but I have seen more officers respond to a situation than I thought should or needed to. A teenager, unarmed, nothing in hands but a water bottle, get addressed at a park regarding his actions. Over 4 officers showed up. I felt like he was being harassed. That's what you wrote.
Yep.
Can you just tell me a little bit more about that situation?
I was out in the parks walking with my girlfriend, and we were sitting on a bench, and a young man came walking down the path, tennis shoes. All he had in the water is a water bottle, and a lady came up and was yelling at him, and then pretty soon a cop showed up, and we're in where the playground is for younger kids, and pretty soon there was 4 cops there. And I'm thinking, he is unarmed, he's got a water bottle, I don't understand, and it was in a public place. You're causing, to me, undue, they could have taken him someplace where it was less public to make such, whatever happened. He ended up walking away.
Okay. So you just thought that more officers showed up, they kind of harassed the kid, or young man, I should say, and it was an unnecessary police response. Would that be a fair summary?
I would agree, yes.
Is there anything about that situation that would affect your view of this case? Like, would you say, so many officers showed up on this case?
I wouldn't know that. I only know what that little clip showed me. I don't even know how many officers were there, how many showed up. I'm just witnessing based on what my incident was at the park, and this was after the incident, and I think cops are probably on edge right now. They're looked at the microscope, and that's too bad, because that's not their role. They're here to protect us, and it's just too bad that I witnessed that particular incident on a young boy with just a water bottle in his hand. I mean, if he had anything that I felt in his hand that was a threat, then I totally agree with the number of officers that showed up.
Okay, fair enough. There were a list of several kind of broad statements, and you were asked to sort of rank your opinion of these statements from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Okay?
Okay.
So my question is about just a couple of those I want to follow up. You were asked the question, police in my community make me feel safe, and you check the box, I somewhat agree with that. Can you explain your thinking there?
That was just based off that incident that I'd seen in the park.
Okay. You were asked the question, police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, and you somewhat disagreed with that.
I think it's really based on the officer and their opinions and how they address people. I know without personal experience, but I've just heard that some officers aren't the best and they don't treat everybody equally, and I think they should. Doesn't matter who they are, they should treat everybody the same. Whether they pull them over for this, they pull them over for that. We shouldn't have, based on your racial and how you look, determine how you get treated when you get pulled over.
Okay, fair enough. You were asked your opinions on both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and I believe you sort of have the same response, at least generally. You write, I believe all lives matter, doesn't matter the color of their skin or nationality they are, all lives matter, underlined.
I truly believe that.
But yet your opinion of Black Lives Matters was somewhat unfavorable. Why would that be?
I'm not sure why I answered that, because I still strongly believe that all lives matter. It doesn't matter who they are, what they are, they all matter. We're all important.
Now, I know your employment takes you, or you work in a clinic setting.
Correct.
And I'm assuming with doctors and nurses, and you have relationships with doctors and nurses in a professional context.
Correct.
If you were a juror on this case, would you call up one of your doctor or nurse friends and say, this is what these doctors are saying?
Absolutely not.
Okay. You did initially, I just want to make sure I heard correctly, you initially had some concerns about your employment and finances and things like that. That's all been taken care of, I'm assuming?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. The last question you were asked as a part of this questionnaire is, do you want to serve as a juror on this case? And you checked the box, not sure. You are nervous. You wrote, I'm nervous. I've never been a juror before, and to be on such a high-profile case. Would people know I am a juror on this case during or after? Question. Would I be safe? Question. During and after. I don't want to walk around or be in my home and not feel safe. That's what you wrote.
Yep.
So let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions on that. How did you feel when you came down to the government center and saw sort of the fortifications, for lack of a better word, around the area?
A little concerned, but there wasn't as many there as I anticipated to be, so that made me feel better. But knowing that there's so much security here, I feel better, and the fact that the jurors names aren't going to be released before, during, or hopefully a while after. Being as I'm new to this, I didn't know what to expect, and so I just was voicing my opinion because I just didn't know what I didn't know.
Sure.
So
now that you have seen how we're dealing with this situation, you know your anonymity is, we're attempting to protect your anonymity, you feel more comfortable and willing to serve?
yes.
May I have a moment?
All right, Mr. Slisher.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Noticed on your questionnaire you indicated one of your hobbies is motorcycle riding.
That's correct.
Right. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
I have a 2019 Softail Heritage Classic, and I like to ride whenever I can.
Okay. Do you just within the state or do you travel?
Being it's just recently new, so I just strictly stay within the Twin Cities, kind of metropolitan outskirts area. Not a lot of riding I do.
Haven't ventured out to Sturgis or anything?
No. Not recently. Many years ago I did, but
All right. One moment, I'm sorry. And what got you interested in motorcycle riding?
what interests me?
Yes.
My late husband was really into it, so I got my license just to make sure that if anything happened to him, I could still ride. And I ride with him, kind of now in the spirit. So,
Well, thank you for telling us about that. You were asked some questions about the difference between a protest and a riot, and you said you understood there is a difference. What I would like to ask you is if you can tell us in your own words, as best you can, what is the difference in your mind between a protest and a riot?
a protest is somebody walking around with signs who made note of a particular topic or interest, and a riot is one when they actually do harm to buildings to cause attention.
And you said that there were some riots or property damage that happened fairly close to your residence, is that right?
Correct.
What went through your mind when this was all unfolding?
I'm concerned that it was going to come into my neighborhood and wondered what do I do during that circumstance. And I guess I just was concerned that what do I do? Do I call the police? Will that, put salt in the wound? Do I just let them do their thing? I mean, I think with anybody it was the question, how do they handle it if it comes close to them?
And what did you ultimately do?
Nothing. I stayed in my home and did nothing and hoped that it didn't come.
Did that work out?
It did.
You didn't suffer any property damage or anything like that?
No, sir, it did not.
And did any of your friends, neighbors, relatives suffer any property damage?
No.
You indicated that you watched the video one time, but you had not watched it since because you found it disturbing. Is that right?
To be clear, I've never watched the full thing.
Okay.
So I don't even know what happened after I heard him say something. I totally shut it off. So I've never seen the whole video in its full entirety.
And you shut it off specifically because you found it disturbing.
Correct.
But you've indicated that, if that's something that you had to view again, you would be able to do that.
I would have to.
Taking you back to your description of the incident you saw at the park in which you believe that officers used too much force, you recall that?
Correct, yes.
Do you recall the race of the individual against whom you believe they used too much force?
The individual, the boy, was white. Not that that made any difference to me, but it was just the fact that there were so many officers.
And you felt that under the circumstances, they just simply over-responded?
Correct.
And I just want to go over again the conversation that you had with defense counsel about your views of Black Lives Matter. And you indicated that you had a somewhat unfavorable view of Black Lives Matter, and said you weren't really sure why you wrote that, the unfavorable view. Can
No,
you just, upon reflection?
I still really don't know where I was when I wrote that, but maybe I was thinking that sometimes, or maybe they were taking it too far. I don't know exactly why I answered that way. I'd have to probably try to remember where my mind was at that time, or did I witness something or see something, or I just can't fully answer as to why I would write that, because something must have happened or triggered me or that, because usually I don't, like I said, all lives matter to me. It doesn't matter who they are, what they are. They all matter because we're all important in this world.
And the question I had was, maybe do you associate that group with property damage or rioting?
No.
And do you believe that if someone was to make the statement that Black Lives Matter or some other lives matter, that they're saying other lives don't matter?
It can be perceived like that,
Okay.
and I think they are just making it, maybe they felt, and I don't know because I'm not Black, to know, maybe they felt that they were never heard, and that's why they are coming up with Black Lives Matter, because maybe they felt that they never were seen, they never were heard, and whereas I don't believe that to be true, but I'm not them, and I might see things in a different view.
And so when you say someone could perceive it like that it could mean that they're saying not all lives matter, do you perceive it that way? When you hear that someone say Black Lives Matter, do you perceive that they're saying that not all lives matter?
It can be perceived. Whether I perceive it like that, that's a great question. I would probably just tell them that all lives matter again.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I do perceive that they think only Black lives matter.
And then so the next question or series of questions had to do with Blue Lives Matter. And so when you hear someone say Blue Lives Matter, do you perceive that in the same way, that maybe they're saying not all lives matter, only blue lives matter?
I took that to perceive everybody else. Blue lives, well, maybe I'm misinformed. I don't know what Blue Lives Matter mean, but I took that to mean that that's everybody else.
So I should follow up. I mean, what is your understanding of what that means if somebody were to say Blue Lives Matter? What, in your
And
own
have them
words?
clarify, what do they mean by blue?
Okay.
What does blue mean?
Okay. What did you think it meant when you answered the survey?
That meant everybody else.
Everybody else. Did you associate, or have you ever associated that Blue Lives Matter with police officers?
Oh, so that's what that means. As blue means officers. Say that question again now, please.
Sure. And I think you answered it. But at the time you were filling out the survey, did you have an understanding that Blue Lives Matter actually refers to police officers? Blue lives.
I can honestly say no, I didn't perceive it like that because I didn't know what blue meant.
Okay. On the survey, you indicated that you believe that sometimes local police departments will cover up instances of excessive force rather than to correct it. You said you somewhat agreed with that proposition. Do you recall that?
That's probably based on my witness in the park, because when we were walking down the path and the officer told us to stay back, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of concerned for this one kid. There's like 5 officers, and he said, stay back. And I'm like, okay. So, I mean, that was my only, I've never had any incidents or witnessed anything other than that one incident at all with any police officers at all.
It sounds like that made an impact on you, though. You remember how long ago that was?
It was last summer, August, September. It was a really nice day. We were out walking. We were just out for a long time. We were out for a long walk, and that was just something happened right in front of me, which I've never been witness to, and that's probably why it's stuck with me, because it's my only incidents that I've seen.
When the officer, so you indicated that you saw something that concerned you, but the officer told you to stay back and repeated it?
Correct.
How did it make you feel when the officer said that to you?
Kind of like I didn't matter, that I was concerned with the particular boy that was being harassed, is how I looked at it. That I should stay out of mind your own business type of thing.
And you said that the officer said this twice. Did you attempt to argue with him or ask a question?
No, I'm not in any position to argue with an officer. I just stayed back.
Okay. Do you know why he said it twice, or?
To probably make his point across.
Okay.
I don't know.
It wasn't in response to you asking a question or attempting to insert
I
yourself?
just was, like I said, I was walking up to him and he said, "Stay back." And I said, "Well, I just concerned for that kid." And he said, "Stay back."
Okay.
And so I did.
Okay. Sometimes when I ask a question, people tell me I'm arguing, so I just needed it clarified. Not you.
No.
All right. Do you have any concerns that, with the precautions we have here, the plexiglass and mask wearing and whatnot? Do you feel that we've adequately taken steps to reduce the risk of COVID-19?
Yes, you have.
Okay. Do you think it's enough, or maybe even too far?
One cannot be too cautious.
One moment, Your Honor. Can you tell me a little bit more about your work as an executive assistant, what it is you specifically do, without naming your employer, giving any identifying information?
Yeah, I work as an executive assistant at a clinic in Minneapolis, and I assist the VP and director of our actual building. So I work with a lot of her meetings and his meetings, just going over things and issues that happen across our building. That's pretty much sums up my role.
Okay. And so you're working with someone in the sort of an administrative position. You're not working with a physician?
I work with physicians only if it has to do with meetings and such, not on a day-to-day basis do I get in touch with them.
Okay.
I know who they are, but I don't work with them on a direct basis at all.
So, for example, working specifically with cardiologists or pulmonologists?
No, not on a day, only if it has to do with a meeting request, and then I usually reach out to their assistants.
Well, is it fair to say that you do have and place trust in police officers?
I have placed trust, and that's their role, and that's I have nothing but to believe that until they show me something different.
And so with that, understanding that in this case, there will be law enforcement officers who will be called to testify. There will be civilian bystanders who will be called to testify. And you would be asked to judge their credibility to determine whether or not one should be believed or another one should be believed. And based on your trust in police officers, I just need to ask you if you would be able to look at the testimony of a police officer in the same manner that you would look at the testimony of some other witness who wasn't a police officer, perhaps a bystander.
Absolutely. Doesn't matter. Their uniform doesn't change who they are.
You don't think that you might tend to believe a police officer more simply because they are a police officer?
Not necessarily.
Right. Thank you very much. Your Honor will pass for cause.
Juror number 55, you will be on this jury.
Oh, okay.
So, you can go about your business until March 29th at 9 a.m., which is when we anticipate starting the trial itself.
Okay.
And so we will be in contact probably to remind you or to tell you if things have been delayed. I think you've already realized sometimes there are delays.
Yes.
And we apologize for that, but it's just the way things happen. So we do appreciate your time here. And the deputy will take some stuff from you on the way out, but unless you hear from us otherwise, March 29th at 9 a.m., you'll be escorted to that same courtroom to wait.
Okay, so I come in like to
Same process, same process as today, same places where to park, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
All the same, and you'll go to the same courtroom to start off with.
Okay.
All right?
Sounds good.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you.